Julian Price used to be the kind of guy who didn't pass unnoticed in the horse riding tournaments. To the 12 years already accumulated medals, photos in local magazines, and a smile confident she seemed made to shine in the podiums. He lived in Reno, Nevada, with his parents and a sister minor who followed him all sides with a camera in hand. His life was spinning in around horses, speed, control, that dance almost magic between rider and beast. But everything changed a summer afternoon. Andre, when an outing with friends ended in a brutal accident, the ATV he was driving overturned in a sharp turn, and in a second that lasted forever, Julian lost the movement of his legs. Doctors were clear, paraplegia complete, and with that word, his world broke. For months, Julian locked himself away in himself. He refused the wheelchair as who refuses to accept a sentence. He became irritable, elusive, almost mute. His room was transformed in a trench, walls full of trophies that no longer meant anything. Photos that hurt more than they inspired. Their parents tried to encourage him with visits, therapy, promises of new goals, but he didn't want to listen. Horse riding, its passion. It seemed now a cruel irony. What sense had continue if I couldn't to ride again? It was his sister, Emily, who broke his silencer tomorrow when I put a video on his cell phone. It showed a black, unbridled, untamed steed, furiously resisting everything, attempted taming in the Silver Ridge Equestrian Showcase. "His name is Thunder," he said. They say that no one can come closer." Julian didn't reply, but something in his look lit up by first time in months. Thunder's video became an obsession, silent for Julian. Every night, when all was sleeping, he played it back one and the other time. I watched the movements of the horse, its breathing agitated, the way she dodged the coaches with a mixture of fear and defiance. It wasn't just strength I saw in Hidran was pain, a need to protect oneself, and in that reflection wild, Julian recognized his own struggle. He began to read about ethology, about non-verbal communication between humans and horses, about non-violent methods. How much further I learned, more felt like he wasn't that far from connecting with Thunder, until one day, without saying anything, he asked his mother to take him to the event. She, surprised but excited, she agreed without doing anything questions. So, with the heart beating as I didn't do it. Within months, Julian arrived at the Silver Ridge Equestrian Showcase. The environment in a place was electrifying. There was photographers, commentators, families whole and riders of all his state, but all eyes. They pointed at the corral where Thunder was neighing furiously, spinning around incessantly, his eyes blazing as embers. The presenter's announcement. It was clear. Whoever want to tempt, come closer, you have 1 minute. And then Julian raised his hand. A murmur spread among the public as a wave. Some laughed, others were uncomfortable, but he didn't stop. He pushed his chair with determination and approached the edge of the corral. The organizers, they hesitated, but his mother intervened firmly. "Leave him alone, try it." When finally they opened the fence, Julian did not take it, whip, nor rope, nor rod. Just one small bag with cut apples and its voice trembling. Thunder watched him from far away, tense, defiant. The silence was so thick that even the wind, it seemed, to have been arrested. Julian didn't have a plan, just intuition. He stopped the chair at a distance, cautious, and lowered his gaze, avoiding direct eye contact. I knew that, for an animal like Thunder, a look fixed could be interpreted as a threat. He took out an apple slice from the bag and left it on the ground without moving. Then, in a soft voice, he began to speak. They were not orders, neither commands, just simple words, almost a whisper. "I'm not going to make you damage. I'm just like you. I don't run anymore as before." At first, the steed, he snorted suspiciously and struck ground with one of its front paws. But then, something imperceptible changed. Thunder turned his body slowly, lowered slightly, nodded, and took a step. Then another, and another, until, to everyone's amazement, he sniffed the apple and gently brought it to her. There was a murmur widespread in the crowd. No one dared to say anything, as any sound could break the moment. Julian neither said more, simply repeated his gesture with another slice, this time a little more near him. Thunder stopped. It seemed hesitate, and then came back to move forward. And then the impossible happened. The horse went down completely head in front of Julian. It wasn't submission, it was respect. It was an agreement, tacit between two beings who knew each other the pain. The cameras captured the instant exact when. Thunder bent his front legs and knelt softly before him. The audience exploded in applause. Some even, they cried. But for Julian, the noise disappeared. I just felt the heat of the animal's breath, the vibration subtle in his chest, and a lonely tear that rolled down by his cheek. For the first time from the accident, he didn't feel broken. He felt seen. If you've made it this far and something moved you, subscribe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to live on. After that day, Julian returned to the Center Equestrian each tomorrow. He was no longer a curious spectator, but part of the landscape. The caretakers, at first skeptical, began to look at him with respect. No one else dared to enter the corral with Thunder, but Julian did it naturally. Sometimes he didn't speak, he just sat by the fence and read to him in voice high. Other times, simply, he let the horse sniff his wheels, his chair, his hands. There were a peace between them that he did not need explanation. It was like, each one would have found in the other a way of breathing better. Gradually, Thunder stopped charging. He began to trot with less fury, to accept a brush, even allowing others to observe it closely if Julian was present. The connection caught the attention of the media. A recorded video by a viewer went viral in a matter of hours. The boy who tamed the untamed, they said the headlines. Television programs they wanted interview him, magazines. Equestrians called him to make him reports. But Julian wasn't looking for fame. He rejected the invitations that asked him put on a show with Thunder. He didn't want to tame, nor mount, nor show off. I just wanted continue healing alongside that animal. However, not all they applauded his approach. Some coaches accused him of putting in risk to the public, others of romanticizing a conduct dangerous. That horse is still being wild, they said. The boy is a lucky amateur. But Julian didn't argue. Instead, he continued, going to the corral every day, carrying only his voice, his patience, and the commitment not to give up never further. One Saturday in the afternoon, the event organizers, they decided invite Julian to an exhibition inclusive horse riding, where they were presented riders with disabilities of all kinds country. At first, he hesitated. He couldn't mount as before, and Thunder never there was being saddled. But something in his insides told him that he should try, not to prove anything to anyone, but to close a cycle. With the help of a coach specialized in equine therapy, they began to prepare a routine in which Julian would not need control the horse, but accompany him. They rehearsed during weeks in silence. At dawn, before the grounds would be filled, Thunder seemed to understand each movement. He learned to walk next to the chair, to stop with a sign, slight arm, to turn with a body tilt. The presentation was all less ostentatious, no music, no frills, just a boy in wheelchair slowly entering the field alongside a steed as black as night. The public held his breath. Julian raised his hand and Thunder stopped. Then, after a brief glance, they began a smooth course between cones and obstacles. Symbolic, there were no acrobatics, neither jumps, just one choreography of pure confidence. When they finished, the silence. It lasted a couple of seconds, and then it exploded. He applauds further. Sincere that Julian had heard in his life. That night when he got home, he said nothing. He just caressed a Thunder's snout in his stable and stayed there, leaning against the wood, like, you will no longer need anything else, because I finally understood. It wasn't about going back to being who I was before, but about being who I was being born now. Shortly after the exhibition, a occupational therapist who had seen the video, approached Julian with a proposal. Unexpected. She wanted him and Thunder to visit an equine therapy center for children with disabilities severe. At first, Julian hesitated. He didn't consider himself a therapist, nor a role model, but the woman, he insisted, "You don't have to cure anyone. Just be there. There. Your presence already inspires." Moved out of curiosity and out of an intuition that I did not know explain, he agreed. The first visit was in a cool autumn morning. Upon arriving, he found a group of children in wheelchairs, with canes, with looks off, and exhausted parents. Thunder showed restless at first, but when Julian positioned himself next to him, his breathing calmed. One by one, the children approached. Some just touched the horse's back, others looked at him in amazement, as if they couldn't believe that such an animal they would accept without judgment. That day, a little girl named Sophia, barely 6 years old and diagnosed with cerebral palsy, managed rest the palm of your hand on a Thunder's snout. It was a gesture minimal, almost imperceptible, but enough for his mother to break in crying. Never there was extended he arm so far away, she said between sobs. Julian was speechless. He didn't need understand everything. I felt it. There was a living energy between them. They began to go each week. Sometimes Julian would tell stories. Sometimes they just sat in circle and let Thunder approach whoever needed him. Each session was different, unpredictable, and yet all they had something in common. One small victory, a smile, a moving finger. A child who finally said one word. Julian was beginning to see that his purpose was not in the medals, but in those sparks that helped to light. As the months passed, Julian's routine transformed. By complete, his life, it no longer turned around what there was lost, but of what could offer. He continued his visits to the Equine Therapy Center, but also began receiving invitations from schools, foundations, and events community. Not as a figure of spectacle, but as someone who could talk from experience. I accepted some invitations, but rejected any proposal that would involve his history. I didn't want Thunder to be reduced to a viral gimmick or for his link became in merchandise. The important thing for him was to maintain the truth of the process. He knew that many people came searching miracles, but he repeated always the same. There is no magic. Just time, patience, and respect. In one of those encounters, met Samuel, a 15-year-old teenager who had lost a leg in a traffic accident. He was reserved, ironic, and didn't want to know anything about horses, but his mother insisted and took him to one of the sessions. Samuel stayed in silence during all the activity, with the arms crossed and gaze nailed in the floor. Julian didn't force anything. In the end, he approached her and said, in low voice, "You don't have to touch the horse, just stay. Sometimes being is enough." For his surprise, Samuel returned a week later next, and to the next, until one day, without anyone asking, he briefly stroked Thunder's mane. He said nothing. He just smiled, barely. Julian understood. At that moment that even the further closed, they needed a place where they were not required heal immediately, where they could simply be human. Have you ever needed that kind of silence that embraces? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss stories. So, news of Julian's work with Thunder reached the press. National. A Los Angeles documentary filmmaker became interested by his history and proposed do a movie short that would show the process of connecting with the horse and the impact in the children from the Equine Therapy Center. Julian, after thinking about it much, he accepted with a condition: did not want scripts, neither scenes mounted. If you do it, it has to be real, with everything, even what doesn't come out perfect. The film crew was discreet, accompanying the sessions without intervening. They captured moments unique. A child autistic who recited the names of Thunder's body parts with a precision amazing. A teenager who had lost he speaks after a trauma and who murmured his first hello while he stroked the horse. When the short film was published on the internet, he played millions of hearts in all world, but with visibility also came tensions. Some sectors of the world, equestrian traditional, they began to criticize openly to Julian. They claimed that his methods were unorthodox. They had no formal training, such as tamer, neither as therapist. Even was a campaign on social networks that accused him of promoting a type of idolatry emotional towards the animals. Julian, far from responding with anger, wrote a public letter, simple and honest. "I'm not a therapist. I'm not a coach. I'm just someone who broke down by inside and found a mirror on a horse. If that aid to others to breathe better, I'll continue doing it." The criticism did not disappear, but they began to lose strength in the face of the forcefulness of the results. The images they spoke by year alone. Thunder was no longer the horse that anyone could touch, and Julian was no longer the broken boy that everyone, they looked at him with pity. In the middle of the year, Julian received an unexpected letter. It came from a foundation, international, that organized equine therapy meetings in different continents. They invited him to participate as an exhibitor at a conference in Switzerland, along with specialists in everything he world. The invitation was not only for his eye work with Thunder, but by his impact emotional that generated in children, families and professionals. At first, he thought in reject her. He gave her fear travel so far, in other language, without the support of your routine daily. But his mother encouraged him with a phrase that stuck with him, recorded, "Your story is not just yours. It belongs to everyone, those who need hope." He accepted, and 2 months later, he was boarding by first time a plane with Thunder on it, a special cabin adapted for support animals emotional. Arriving in Geneva was a whirlwind of emotions. He was greeted with warmth, but also with protocol, rigorous that included interviews, demonstrations, and panel discussions. Julian remained true to himself. Same. He did not use elegant suits, nor prepared speeches formal. He went up on stage with his chair, one t-shirt simple and one photo of Thunder in the background. "I'm not coming to teach anything," he said. "I just want to share what I learned, listening in silence." Then he projected fragments of the documentary and narrated, with voice trembling but firm, how there was past of not wanting live to find purpose in each visit to the corral. The audience remained in silence absolutely. When they finished, they stood up to applaud. Some were crying, others they expected lined up to hug him. That night, as Thunder rested in a stable close, Julian understood that his history, both of them, had crossed borders, and that vulnerability, when it is honest, has a deeper echo stronger than any fame. After his returning from Switzerland, Julian's life was filled with new opportunities. Institutions. They began to contact him to collaborate in training programs, both in his scope, educational as therapeutic, but he was selective. He did not accept proposals that sought convert his link with Thunder on a product commercial, rejected contracts with brands, appearances paid in television, and even a publishing offer that was intended to rewrite his history to make it more attractive. Julian knew that if crossed that line, would lose the essence of everything that had built. In its place, opted by create a small foundation with his sister Emily, dedicated to financing animal therapies for children in vulnerable situations. They gave it a simple and powerful name, Free Roots. The foundation grew up quickly thanks to donations, volunteers, and word of mouth. Julian did not convert in a celebrity, but in a reference silent. He continued visiting the Equine Therapy Center each week, and Thunder continued being his inseparable companion. The horse, which was once a symbol of fury, now walked slowly among the children with a delicacy surprising. He was no longer thrashing, no longer puffing. He seemed to have found, he too, a new purpose. Sometimes, as Julian watched Thunder approach a crying child in silence, I felt that I no longer needed words. There was learned to read sadness in the bodies, in the looks, in the gestures, minimums, and there were discovered that sometimes the most powerful is not to cure, but simply be, without judgment, without haste, without fear. One afternoon, during the usual session, something happened that would mark a new turn in Julian's path. A desperate mother arrived with his son Matteo, 9 years old, that he had not spoken for months after witnessing an accident car. The child refused to communicate, even with gestures, and his look was always lost, like were in other world. The therapists were present, but it was Julian who approached first. He didn't say anything. He just sat down at her side, with Thunder behind. They passed several minutes in silence. Then, without looking at the child, Julian directly began to tell him a history invented on a horse that had also been left speechless, until one day he met to another wounded being who understood him without speaking. As he recounted, Thunder walked slowly and leaned his snout on the child's leg. Matteo didn't react at first, but after some seconds, his fingers moved. He touched gently the horse's muzzle and then looked at Julian. And then what happened to the horse? He asked in a voice snores, like if I pulled her out of a deep well. The whole room froze. The mother broke in crying, covering himself face with his hands. Julian felt a lump in the throat that did not know dissemble. It wasn't a miracle. It was a gesture, small, yes, but for that child it was a whole mountain. From then on, Matthew returned each week, every time further connected, more present. And every time he did it, Thunder recognized him immediately. Julian understood that the words, although important, were not the only way to heal. That sometimes the language further powerful was the one who did not need to be said in voice high. With the time, Thunder became into something more than a symbol for Julian. It was his partner, your mirror, your other half. There were days when Julian would wake up feeling empty, like the weight of the world would have fallen on him, posed again in the shoulders. In those days, he didn't talk to anyone. He would just walk to the stable, sit next to Thunder and rest his forehead against his side. The horse wasn't doing anything extraordinary, it just breathed with him, at that slow, steady pace, which seemed to say, "Here you are, here I am." It was a way of remembering mutually to follow forward not always means advance fast. Sometimes, it's just about not letting go of the invisible rope that united. In one of those mornings, silent, Julian received a message unexpected. It was from a pediatric hospital in another city, where a group of doctors there was adapted a special unit to integrate therapy animal-assisted. They wanted him and Thunder to spend a week with the patients further delicate, those who could not leave their rooms. The logistics were complicated. Thunder had to be moved in conditions special, comply with regulations health, and coordinate with multiple teams. But Julian didn't hesitate. He said yes, not for vanity, neither by prestige. He did it because I sensed that if that horse had tapped the soul of so many, could also do it in places where hope, it seemed, run out. And so, a week then, Thunder crossed by first. You see the doors, automatic hospital, accompanied by a soft sound of wheels and restrained footsteps. The hospital had a special wing conditioned for the visit of Thunder. They had placed carpets non-slip, covered the walls with vinyls of natural landscapes, and coordinated short shifts so that each child could be near the horse. The doctors were expectant, but also worried by possible incidents. Thunder, however, seemed to understand the delicacy of the place. He walked slowly, sniffing respectfully each corner, stopping when a child looked at him with curiosity, or when someone raised his hand from a bed. Julian guided him without reins, without commands, only with small movements of his body and a connection silent that no longer needed essays. One of the patients was Valeria, a 8-year-old girl, years with leukemia in state advanced. He was wearing weeks without leaving their room, and there was refused all forms of therapy, emotional. When she was told that a horse was going to visit her, he turned his head toward the window without answering. But when Thunder appeared at the door, something in his body changed. He sat up slowly, leaning in the elbows, and asked to be brought closer. The doctors, they hesitated. but they agreed. Julian came in with thunder and stood at the edge of the bed. Valeria reached out with effort and touched the animal's forehead. "It's soft," she said with a smile weak. And then, without anyone expecting it, she began to cry. It wasn't sadness, it was relief. It was the first emotion that expressed in weeks. Julian stayed with her until she fell asleep, with the fingers still among the thunder's black fur. As they leave the room, the doctors said nothing. They just looked at him with grateful eyes. Like, they had just witnessed something they didn't know about as name. The days in the hospital, they passed like a sigh. Each encounter left a brand, both in the patients as in the staff. A nurse confessed to Julian that, after 20 years working there, never I had seen so many children smile in such a short time. Thunder, unknowingly, had transformed cold aisles in paths of hope. At the end of the week, they organized a simple farewell in the hospital's inner garden. The children who could walk were taken in chairs or with help. Others they observed from the windows. Julian did not give speeches. It only took a microphone for a moment and said, "Thank you for rely in the invisible. Sometimes what cannot be touching is what most us holds." Then he approached Thunder, stroked his forehead, and, without rehearsing it, began to walk beside him by grass, in silence, as if they both understood that these goodbyes also healed. On the way home, Julian felt a mixture of exhaustion and fulfillment. Each experience added layers new to your history, but it also reminded him of his own limits. Although people admired him, he continued having days of pain, moments of doubt, and nights where nostalgia was drowning him. He wasn't a hero, he was a boy who still healed. That honesty was what led him to give a chat in his ancient secondary school. In front of hundreds of students, he spoke without filters. He said his accident, his anger, and his desire to give up. He talked about thunder, about the children, of tears and silences, and he concluded with a phrase that remained written in a wall of the auditorium. "You don't need walk to move forward. You just need something or someone to walk with you." In the end, several students approached. One of them, with tears in his eyes, he said, "Thank you. Today, I decided not to give up." The impact of that school talk was bigger than Julian imagined. He received dozens of messages from students, parents, and teachers. Some, they counted stories of overcoming. Others, simply they were grateful by saying in voice high what many they felt in silence. It was then when Emily proposed something bold, to record a series of short videos accessible to young people from all over the world. Where share his thoughts without filters, neither edition. "You don't need a big production," he told her. "Only you voice your history and that everyone they want know." At first, Julian showed himself reluctant. He didn't like to see himself in camera, nor expose yourself. But after thinking about it, he understood that if his history could, preventing a single young person from giving up was worth it. He tried. They started recording and he's stable, with thunder in the background. Each video lasted less than 5 minutes and addressed a topic different: frustration, fear, loss, shame, hope. Julian spoke as, we're in front of a friend. I didn't read scripts. I just closed eyes for a moment and let out what he had in a chest. The videos were posted on social networks with the title, "From the Chair with the Heart." In a few days, the messages began to arrive from countries that neither not even knew. Young people in wheelchairs, mothers with children, sick people, teachers, retired soldiers. Everyone found something in those simple words, in that image of a boy who wasn't looking for compassion, but connection. Julian did not convert an influencer, nor I was looking for likes, but his voice, authentic and unadorned, began to form an invisible network of people learning to walk from where were. With the growing community that was formed in around his videos, Julian began to receive invitations to collaborate in projects educational in line. A university in Argentina, he proposed to her, engrave a masterclass on resilience for a psychology course, positive. A rural school in Colombia wanted me to participate in a video call with your students. Even an organization in Japan, dedicated to the mental health of young people, asked him permission to translate his videos into Japanese. Julian accepted what he could get. As long as he felt the target was genuine, he still didn't get paid by those collaborations. For him, the reward was receiving messages as that of a 14-year-old boy. Years, he wrote, "Today, I decided return to try it because I saw that neither you had all the answers, and even so you followed." Amidst all that movement, Thunder's health began to show signs of wear. He no longer jogged with the same energy, nor did he get up so quickly in the mornings. The vet. It was clear. It was the natural onset of old age. Julian looked at him in silence while I listened. He diagnosis. He didn't cry. He didn't despair. He just thanked the animal for every day shared. It began to adapt activities, reducing rhythm, taking care of his joints, taking him only to the meetings, further calmed down. Thunder, even with less strength, continued looking at Julian with those eyes that seemed to understand it everything. They didn't need do big things. It was enough to be. One afternoon, as they both rested under a tree, Julian whispered, "It doesn't matter how much time we have. The important thing is that we are here, together." Thunder closed eyes and supported his head against his friend's thigh. And in that gesture, there was more love than in 1,000 words. Aware of the passage of time, Julian decided prepare a group of volunteers to continue his job in the equine therapy center. I didn't want the project. It depended only from him or from Thunder. He selected carefully to young people with sensitivity, patience, and willingness to listen. For months, they accompanied in each session, teaching them not only techniques, but also attitudes. "Here we don't come to correct, we come to accompany," he repeated always. The center began to grow, incorporating new rescued horses, adapting the spaces and receiving more children. Thunder followed, being the soul of the place, but now shared his essence with others, four-legged companions, who gradually learned to trust in the humans. One day, during a meeting with the volunteers, one of them asked Julian if sometime there was thought in write a book, not to make you famous, but so that others learn what here we learned with you. Julian smiled modestly, but the idea began to haunt his mind. I didn't want a autobiography traditional. He thought into something else intimate, more real, a collection of stories lived with Thunder, told from the emotion, with the voices of the children, parents, silences, and the small ones' transformations. Emily volunteered to help you with the structure, and together they started to work at night. The title arose naturally, as Ya already had state. Waiting. What a horse that didn't talk taught me. They didn't know, someone would publish it, but that didn't matter. The essential thing was to leave a record of a truth that there was changed lives, beginning for his own. While they were writing his book, Julian and Emily revived moments that believed have forgotten. They cried when they remembered Valeria, the little girl from the hospital, who died a few months after playing by first time to Thunder. They laughed, remembering Samuel, who ended up becoming in one of the volunteers further dedicated to the center, and they also stayed in silence several times, recognizing how far they had gone, arrived from that late in which Julian, broken and aimless, saw by first time the video of the untamed horse. Each story reminded them that pain, when shared with respect and purpose, can turn into something else greater than oneself. As the manuscript was advancing, they began to receive visits from people who had continued his history from different parts of the country. Some, they arrived with children in arms, others with handwritten letters. No one came for selfies nor by autographs. They came by gratitude. A mother traveled from Other Bean just to say, "Thank you for teach my son that his chair is not a cage, but a different way of walking." Julian always, he listened attentively, without believing himself to be special. He considered himself a bridge, nothing more, a connector between pains that seemed isolated, but when they were named, they stopped weighing so much. Thunder, calm in his side, received each visit with the same nobility that had it characterized from that first day in the corral. It was no longer the wild indomitable. He was a silent master, a sunset. While they reviewed the last chapters of the book, Julian received a video call from a special education school in Chile. The director asked her to speak briefly with one of his students, Tomas, a teenager with autism who had developed a strong connection with thunder through the videos. When it appeared on the screen, Thomas didn't speak at first. He only showed a drawing, a black horse with wings, walking next to a boy in wheelchair that he was holding a flower. Julian was thrilled to see it. "Is that what we are us?" he asked with a smile. Thomas nodded and said, "You they fly without taking off feet on the ground." That phrase was left recorded in Julian's mind for days. It was proof that his history had crossed more than borders physical. There were reached hearts that also sought to fly. Shortly after that, they received a letter from an independent publisher that had learned about the book project and wanted to publish it, such which was unchanged his essence. Julian hesitated at first, fearing lose control over a message, but after talk to the editor and check his eye respect by the original text, accepted. The book was published in a limited way, but with a reception warm and sincere. Many readers, they confessed, read it in voice high with your children, or leave it in waiting rooms, or send it as a gift to someone who needed it. It wasn't a bestseller, nor was leaving in commercial display cases, but was where I had to be. In the hands of those who did. You know that sometimes what heals the most is a history told with the naked soul. Emily, with tears in the eyes, he told her a night, "This book is not the end of your history, Julie. It's just the echo of everything that already you sowed." With the publication of the book, the Equine Therapy Center began to receive more requests than ever. Julian, far from letting himself go overwhelmed, created a system of rotation and groups reduced so that each child could receive attention personalized. It was no longer just about the connection with thunder, but about extending that philosophy of respect and listening to everything he team. The volunteers, ancient, they began to form the new, and the center became in a living learning space constant. It was not unusual to see teenagers with emotional scars teaching children further small as approach a horse with caution. As each one was giving back a little of what there was received. Julian them observed from the shadows without needing to intervene. I knew something was wrong, working well when they no longer needed it in his center of everything. In parallel, thunder continued aging. Your body asked rest, and Julian respected it. They spent further time sitting together than in movement. Some mornings, they would just stand next to each other, staring as the sun was coming in through the cracks in the stable. In those moments, Julian felt a peace that could not explain. I didn't need to speak, nor record, nor write, just be. Thunder was no longer involved in sessions with children, but the visited from far away, like a grandfather watching his grandchildren play from the window. The children, they knew who he was, and they greeted him tenderly. "There this he wise," they said. Julian smiled, knowing that nickname was no exaggeration, because there was something in Thunder's eyes that followed teaching, even without moving, even in silence. Winter day, Julian received an invitation that left him speechless. The committee organizer of the Games Paralympics wanted it as keynote speaker at the opening ceremony, not to talk about sports, but to represent his spirit of improvement and resilience. He hesitated much, not for fear scenic, but because I felt that that story was also Thunder's, and it was not sure how tell it without him present. But then he understood that each child, every family, every volunteer who had passed by his center was also part of that history. He accepted, and months later, he found himself in front of a stadium packed with thousands of fixed eyes in his chair, in His voice, his speech, it was brief. He didn't talk about achievements or medals. He talked about losing and coming back to meet, of horses that heal without words, of how not all the roads are traveled on foot, but all they can take us far. Yet we find out who walk. When finished, the silence, it was total. And then a ovation that seemed shaky ground between the public. In one of the first, in the rows, stood Emily, her eyes shining. Julian looked up at the sky, as if yeah would search a sign. I didn't know if thunder continued there, watching him from some corner tranquility of the universe. But yes knew a thing, everything he was, everything he had given. He owed it to her, to that steed that one once knelt before him when nobody further I believed that was possible. After the games, routine returned to his channel, but Julian noticed that something had changed inside him. He no longer felt the impulse to multiply in everywhere, nor the need to respond to each message that arrived. He began to value further the moments, little ones, making coffee with Emily in the mornings, reading letters in voice high by the fire, or simply sit under the same tree where thunder used to fall asleep. His world had fallen made wider, but also more intimate. The center continued functioning, the foundation grew, the books they reached new hands, but he was beginning to understand that not everything it was meant to be growth. Sometimes, the soul asks for pause, stillness, a space to remember without rushing. It was on one of those quiet days that he received unavoidable news. Thunder didn't wake up that morning. It had been went to bed normally the night before, eaten well, even accepted Nail's caresses of a little girl knew. But when they went to look for him, he was no longer breathing. They found him lying down in his corner stable favorite, with the body in peace and eyes closed, as Yes simply had decided rest. Julian arrived minutes afterward. He didn't scream, he didn't collapse. He came closer in silence. He bent down as far as he could and rested his forehead against his side, cold. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible. "Thank you for teaching me to live other time." No one else spoke. The volunteers, they formed a circle in silence. Emily came over and held her hand. In that instant, barn hole it seemed stop. Like Yehi, time will give Julian one last gift moment with his friend. Thunder's funeral was simple, but deeply emotional. They buried him in the same center lot, under an old oak tree that shaded the rest area. The children, they painted stones with their names and left them around the tree. Some wrote letters, others, they left drawings. Nobody went forced to speak, but many did it by willpower own. "Thank you for leave me touch you," Sophia said. "Thank you for teach me not to have fear," Samuel muttered. Julian, his voice trembling, she just said a phrase that already there was repeated many times, but that day was heavy more than ever. You don't need words to change a life. Then he placed on earth one bronze horseshoe that guarded from the first day that thunder walked to his side. The wind, it blew softly, like if nature same was also saying goodbye. After Thunder's departure, Julian took some time to be in silence. He left the center by some weeks, delegating all in Emily and the volunteers. I needed digest the loss without haste and without applause, without cameras. He returned to write, not to publish, but for oneself same. He went back to old letters, photos, fragments of conversations, and each night, before sleeping, I opened a notebook where there was noted the first progress with Thunder, the first words of the children, the gestures, minimums that marked his transformation. He didn't cry all days, but he did it sometimes, and he learned not to fight the pain. "Grief is not forgetting," he wrote a night. "It's the deepest way of saying something was worthwhile." I knew that the center would follow, that the new horses would arrive, that the children would continue arriving with questions in the eyes. But I also knew that a part of it always would be there under that oak, next to the one who returned it, the soul, when I already believed it lost. When he returned to the center, something had changed in his way of being. He was no longer looking do everything, nor be in everywhere. He walked or rolled more slowly, watching carefully the new horses, to the volunteers, rookies, to the children who barely were beginning to trust. His presence was more paused, more serene. I didn't need say much. His look was enough to convey the essentials. Thunder continued there, in everyone's memory, in the bedtime stories, in the stories that the little ones told each other. They say that if you close the eyes and you are don't worry, you can do it. Feel breathing to your side, said one of them. Julian did not correct neither, he explained. He just smiled, because he felt it too sometimes. About all when someone played a horse for first time and did it with that respect that Thunder taught them. One morning, while we're preparing an activity with a local school, a boy who had just arrived asked Julian if there was been the first in Ride Thunder. The question took him by surprise. He thought for a second and then replied, "No, Thunder was who taught me to ride other time, not on a horse, but about my same." The boy didn't quite understand, but he laughed and shook his hand. In that gesture, innocent, Julian felt a deep certainty. What they had built was a lot further bigger than the two of them. It was a chain of encounters, of gestures, of stories that followed each other, counting without the need for your presence. Like those bonfires that continue ablaze, although who lit them already been gone. And so, without anyone noticing, Julian understood that Thunder had never been completely gone. He lived in every step, in each caress, in each breathing calm that was born of respect. They passed the years, and the center became in reference national. They came families of different corners of the country, even abroad, looking for what is there, it seemed, dwelling, a different way of healing. Julian continued being part, but already not him center. He preferred it like that. He liked it as the young people who one day arrived broken now were guides for others. How to the new horses, each with its own history, they also found their place. Some in the afternoons, he would take a notebook and sit under the oak tree, right where Thunder was resting. He was writing fragments, memories loose, phrases that I heard in the sessions. I didn't have intention to publish them. It was like talking to your friend, a silent ritual. Sometimes some child approached, sat down at his side without saying anything, and that was enough. He no longer needed to explain what he was doing. It was enough to be there. It was in one of those afternoons that one middle-aged woman approached him with a girl with hair curly and looked scared. "This is Luna," she said. "She's scared of everything, but she saw one of your old videos and asked me. Come." Julian greeted the girl gently, without pressure. He showed her he barn from far away. He spoke to him about the horses, how they too have fear sometimes. Luna didn't respond, but she heard him attentive. They returned several days in a row, always without touching, just looking. Until one morning, Luna approached one of the horses alone. Calm down, he put his hand on his back and said, "He doesn't have me fear." Julian, who was watching her from far away, he felt a tear slide by his cheek. That was it. That was Thunder's legacy. He wasn't in the photos neither. In the awards. I was in moments so invisible, deep, true. After the experience with Luna, Julian decided open a space inside the center called the Corner of Silence. It was not a place to ride, nor to do activities structured. It was simply a shaded space with wooden benches and visual access to the horses. There, any child or adult could sit without being interrupted, without having to participate actively. It was a refuge for those who needed time, a reminder that not everyone equal nor at the same rhythm. The corner turned very popular, especially among further shy. Some would spend hours there, without speaking, just breathing next to the horses, and although in the eyes of others it seemed like they were doing nothing, Julian knew that, in those silences occurred invisible revolutions. One afternoon, one young mother approached him, grateful, and asked him that thought to do in the future, if he did not fear that the project lost strength without Thunder. Julian took a moment before answering. Thunder was the beginning, not the center. What we create together does not depend on your presence physics, but of what he sowed in each one of us. That same night, he wrote a new phrase at the entrance of the center, right under the name Races Libres. We didn't come to tame horses. We came to remember how it sounds the soul. With the time, that phrase became in motto, in mantra, in beacon, because summarized everything Julian had learned from that first time in. Then a wild horse bowed his head to a boy who could no longer walk, but still knew as stay still and offer his heart. With the years, the Julian's name was including in conferences international, studies university and training programs in equine therapy. However, he continued living with the same simplicity as always, never changed his house or his habits. He woke up to the singing of the birds, drank coffee with his sister, and walked around a center every day with the same calm of whom walked by his own history. The children who knew him before followed him visiting, now as youths, adults, some even with children. One of them, already converted in psychologist, told him, "There would be no studied this if you hadn't existed, you and thunder." Julian hugged him, with that a mixture of pride and humility that is only born when one has seen how life blooms even from the pain. One day he received a letter from Nevada. It was from the Old Man Center Equestrian, where had seen by first time to thunder. They invited him back, not to ride nor to do a knot for exhibition, but for sharing his history with the new trainers and jockeys. At first he hesitated. Returning to that place meant to reconnect with a painful past, but it also meant closing a circle. He accepted, and weeks then, it rolled again for that land dusty, where once the crowd had laughed at seeing him enter. This time, he was received with respect. The applause was not by pity, neither surprise. They were by recognition. Julian spoke without papers. As always, he told them what thunder taught him, that strength is not in dominate, but in understand, that sometimes the most brave is to stay still and look into the eyes of fear, and that no one path is lost if one is willing to hear. That visit to the Old Man Center Equestrian closed something deep in Julian. It wasn't revenge, neither vindication, it was peace. Upon returning home, the first thing he did was visit Thunder's grave under the oak tree. He sat in silence, like so many sometimes, but this time with one smile light, serene. He spoke to her as who talks to an old friend. "Did you see that? In the end, we listened. I didn't need more, neither tributes, nor plates, nor monuments. Thunder already lived in each history shared, in each boy who touched a horse without fear, in each volunteer who learned to look with tenderness at what he had previously judged. He was a faceless, nameless legacy recorded in marble, but further firm than any statue." That same 1 year, Julian turned 30 years. Emily organized for him a small celebration in the center. Surrounded by the children, horses, and volunteers, there were none music strong, neither long speeches, just one late full of hugs, letters, drawings, and glances grateful. One of the volunteers, further young people, who there was arrived with depression deep and was now a guide for others. He handed her a notebook with phrases that children had saying after meeting the horses. Julian opened it and on the first page read, I thought I was invisible, but the horse saw me." He closed a notebook with wet eyes. That's it, he thought, all that matters, because in the background your history never there was been about he. It was about what happens when someone, animal or human, dares to look at the other without fear, without haste, and tell him with the body, "You I see." If you were moved by this post, please subscribe. It's the most powerful way to help us continue telling stories that matter. As time went by, Julian began to stay away from social media. "I felt like my history already was sown where I had to be. I didn't need to be present in each digital space, for your message was still alive." The old videos followed circulating, the books followed reaching new hands, and the horses continued teaching in. He sent her as they had made from the beginning. From time to time, and when someone recognized him on the street or at an airport and said, "Thank you for your history," Julian smiled, nodded humbly, and responded, "Always the same. It's not mine. It's everyone's." Those who sometime they needed someone that would look different because he understood it deeply. His role there was been light a spark, but he fire now they held it many. One day, while was walking by, he sent her with a cup of tea in his hand. He stopped to see as a little girl I was trying to approach a new rescued horse. The animal was nervous, restless, with ears in alert. The girl, instead of forcing him, he sat down in the ground far away and began to draw. He did it in silence, without looking at him directly. Julian approached with curiosity and saw that what he was drawing was a scene, a dark horse lying next to a boy in wheelchair. Without saying anything, he placed his hand on her shoulder. She looked at him and said, "This is my friend, but he doesn't know yet." Julian swallowed. It was like revive his own beginning, but from other body, from other eyes, and then knew, with certainty, that history would continue, although he will not speak anymore, although no one will remember it by name, because what they had built was not a personal history. It was a language shared, sown in the soul of those who still needed believe. Oh, did you feel part of this story? Then you are part of our community. Subscribe and follow Walking with We. That night, Julian returned to write in his notebook. I didn't do it all the days, but in moments like that, the words flowed out of him with a naturalness that neither, not even I, was trying control. Today I saw my reflection in a little girl with big eyes and trembling hands, he noted. She didn't scream, she didn't ask help, didn't force, just sat down to wait like I did at time. He closed a notebook and put it away on the shelf, where were resting the memories. Photos old, letters from the children, one horseshoe rusty, and a small wooden figure carved by one of the first volunteers. Each object, it had an echo, a vivid memory. It wasn't nostalgia, it was gratitude, an inventory, emotional than what really mattered. As the days went by, the girl in the drawing, whose name was Noah, began to approach the nervous horse little by little. There was no miracles, just gestures subtle. One look, a caress, an apple offered timidly. Julian watched her from a distance and without intervening. Each progress was a mirror of his own path, and see it from the outside, it moved him more than I expected. One afternoon, Noah managed to touch the horse without it moving away. She looked at him in amazement and then looked for Julian. He lifted her up, his thumb from the shadow of the stable. They said nothing. It didn't missing. It was like if they both knew they had just crossed an invisible threshold, one that isn't marked by applause nor with diplomas, but that changes something forever. Julian understood, a time more, that thunder was there, in each little act of bravery, silent, and that while existed children like Noah, her history never would end completely. Noah's figure turned each time further present in his center. He didn't speak a lot, but had a sensitivity that reminded me of Julian's when he was a teenager. He watched the horses with respect, took note of their movements, and began to write your own reflections in a notebook, small, green-capped man. One day, without warning, he asked Julian to teach him how to drive a session. He was surprised, but he didn't show it. He just nodded, smiled, and said, "You go to teach the same thing that thunder taught me, to listen before speaking." They began to work together in the afternoons, in sessions soft, with children small or quiet. Horses. Noah learned fast, not because imitate Julian, but because found his own way of being present. And in that process, he also returned to learn. Because each person brings a rhythm different, and each rhythm deserves to be respected. During one of those sessions, while Noah guided a child blind in he approaching a horse, Julian felt that something in his insides opened up. It wasn't sadness or joy. It was something deeper, a serene certainty that his time as central figure was arriving at your natural closure, not by tiredness, but because his cycle had been completed. After the activity, he walked, rolled to the oak tree as so many times before. He stayed there for a long time without thinking in nothing. When Emily approached him, he said, "I'm ready." She didn't ask what he meant. She just hugged him because they both knew that big cycles are not announced with noise. They are recognized in his silence, in the peace that remains when one has given everything one had by give. That same one night, Julian shared with Emily his decision. I wanted Leave He Leadership Center's operation in the hands of a new team, formed by the volunteers that he same there was accompanied during years. He would not retire completely. He would continue present as guide, as heart of the place, but would no longer be he who direct the activities, organize visits, neither coordinate agendas. Emily, although surprised, she understood immediately. Always you said this, I had to grow without depending on you. Now is going to really bloom. They prepared together a smooth transition, no ads, grandiloquent. Each volunteer was taking further responsibilities, and Noah became a kind of symbol of the future, young, sensitive, committed. Julian watched her from the shadow with a mixture of pride and tenderness. I no longer felt fear of letting go. I felt trust. To mark his change, they organized a special day called Living Roots. It wasn't a farewell, but a celebration of continuity. Families were invited, old, volunteers from different generations, and children who now were adults. They were filled the meadows of laughter, hugs, and horses trotting freely. Julian didn't speak a lot that day. He only uploaded the little one wooden stage, and with the microphone in his hand, he said, "What started with a horse that no one could touch became in a place where all can be touched without fear. Thank you for hold this history with me. Now leave her continue walking in his own footsteps." Then he stepped off the stage and mingled with the others, like one more. Because then was no longer him founder, nor he protagonist. He was a sower who trusted in his harvest. After Living Roots, Julian's life took on a new rhythm. He no longer had to be pending schedules nor of coordination. He began to dedicate further time to things that had postponed by years, reading novels complete, painting, with watercolors with Emily, walking by the forest near the center on foggy mornings. He also took up writing again, intimate, that which does not seek readers, just understanding. Some afternoons, the further little ones from the center came to his house with drawings, questions, or simply desire to be. Julian them welcomed with hot tea, cookies, and silence shared. They didn't need more. With the time, his house became a corner warm where one learned to listen to life calmly. One day, Noah brought him a gift. It was a wooden case carved with the registrations on the cover to keep the invisible. Inside were letters written by children and volunteers who had passed by his center. Some were from long ago years, others recent. All they were talking about the same thing, the moment exact in which they stopped having fear thanks to a horse, to a glance, at an outstretched hand. Julian read them a by one with misty eyes. He didn't say anything when he finished. He just closed the box, hugged it against the chest, and murmured, "This is all I want, leave it to the world," because understood that his legacy was not there in his face, nor in his name, but in those invisible moments that changed destinations without anyone noticing. And I knew that while someone would dare to play with respect, listen with him body, thunder would follow riding in some corner of another's soul child lost. Julian's health began to deteriorate slightly with the years, as was natural. Nothing serious, just the body talking in whispers after so many battles. I had extra days, tiredness, pain insistent, but never stopped smiling when I listened laughter in the field or neighs in the morning. Emily was always close, like guardian silent like that new stage. One afternoon, while they saw he sunset from his porch, she asked him, "Yeah, I feared die." Julian stayed thoughtfully and replied, "No. Because already I lived many lives in only one, and because I know that when I leave, someone goes to be counting this history to its way, and that is enough." It was not resignation, it was peace. the peace of one who has loved deeply, has lost without staying empty, and has offered to the world everything I had in the soul. Shortly after Teak, he received a visit from Matteo, the child what years back there was spoken again thanks to thunder. Now he was a young man, adult, tall, with a look determined and a camera hanging around the neck. There was studied cinema, and wanted to do a movie based in Julian's story. Not as a tribute, he told her, but as a way to sow what you sowed in me. Julian was excited, but it was clear, I don't want you to do a story of heroes. I want you to show the cracks, the days when I didn't know what to do, the silences. That's where live the truth. Matteo nodded respectfully. They spent the entire afternoon talking, walking by the corners of the center, remembering gestures, anecdotes, looks. Julian didn't know if the movie would arrive far away, but that didn't matter. It was enough to know that once time more, someone wanted to tell the story, and that, as long as it was told truthfully, it would live on. With the film project in March, the center revived a special energy. Matteo filmed with respect, without invading, capturing moments everyday life that under his lens acquired a beauty unexpected. A girl laughing as she fell from the hay, an old horse being petted, Noah leading the way, a session with gentle firmness. Julian participated from the side, sometimes offering an anecdote, others just observing in silence. I was not looking for prominence. I knew that the true value was in the details, in the breaks, in the hesitations, in the meetings sincere between fragility and tenderness. Every time Matteo showed him a scene, Julian nodded in silence. It was like see his life from outside and discover that even the grey days had been part essential to that path. Opening night was intimate, projected in a screen, improvised in the same field where thunder had trotted by first time with him. They came ancient volunteers, families whole, new children, and even some curious people who had heard rumors of that history. Julian arrived early. He settled in his chair by the oak tree and watched how the soft lights were turned on around the place. When the film began, nobody spoke, only the sounds of the wind, footsteps on the earth, and the voice Julian's slow narration, the first meeting with thunder. When it was over, there was no ovation, no shouts, just a deep silence, one of those that embrace. Then, the applause. They arrived, slowly but intense, like thanks. Julian closed eyes for a moment, feeling that there was nothing left by say, that everything was there. Your life, its pain, its hope, your transformation. And that, as always, thunder had it accompanied to the last chart. After the premiere, Matteo received offers to take the film to festivals, but it was Julian who convinced him to distribute it free of charge in schools, hospitals, and centers community. This is not a film to compete with, he told her. It's a seed, and the seeds are distributed, not sold. Thus, the documentary began to circulate all type of spaces, from improvised rooms from small towns to university classrooms in a foreigner. The comments were always similar. I cried. Without knowing why, what, I saw myself reflected. Now I understand that I am not alone. Julian received those words with gratitude, but without attachment. He knew that the important thing was not him, nor his image. It was what history woke up in each. Little by little, his figure public began to blur, and that made him happy, because meant that the message continued, even without his presence. Noah assumed officially the coordination of the center. Matteo returned to recording. New stories of others, children and horses. Emily followed, being heart silent of everything. Julian, by his part, found pleasure in the simple, preparing tea with garden herbs, read in low voice, receive visits small, walk among the trees with their notebook in his lap. Sometimes he would stop under the oak tree, and as he touched the ground, he would feel a gentle warmth that seemed come from another time. I wasn't looking for signs. I was just grateful, because I understood that some presences are not lost, they are transformed, and thunder somehow continued there, not like I remember, but as root. One autumn afternoon, while wrote in his notebook, Julian wrote down a phrase that came to him effortlessly. "A horse taught me not to run." He closed a notebook and left it on the table like, yeah, that was the last one page I needed right. That afternoon, he felt somewhat tired, but said nothing. He simply lay down in his chair by the window and stayed asleep looking he sky. Emily found it further afternoon, with the expression so calm that he couldn't avoid cry in silence. Julian had game as there was lived his last years, in peace, surrounded by love, and with the certainty of having left something eternal sown on earth. The news of his death spread discreetly, like he had dear. There was no tributes massive, neither grades in television, just one chain of messages between those who really knew him. People who had passed by Center E, which had touched a horse by first, maybe thanks to him. They had sensed that his history was also his own. The center organized a ceremony simple. They planted a new tree next to the oak where Thunder rested, and they placed a small plate without name, just with one phrase, "Here, what is born from silence flourishes." Noah read a fragment from the notebook Julian's green, and Matteo projected a farewell short that ended with a still image, Julian and Thunder, side by side, under the sunset. It was not said more. I didn't do missing. Everyone knew they weren't there saying goodbye to a man. They were honoring a way of seeing he world. In the years that followed, Free Root's center continued growing, not in size but in depth. The new one's children, they arrived with their own fears and wounds, and found there is a space where they were not asked, heal, just be. The corner of silence continued receiving visits constants. Julian's tree, as they called it, became a place of reflection, where many they left letters, drawings, or simple stones with words written on them. Noah continued leading with firmness and gentleness, remembering always the teachings that Julian had taught him transmitted. Sometimes counted his history and voice high for the new, and others left it float in the gestures every day, in how he approached the horse more restless, in as I listened to a child without interrupting him, because understood that the true Julian's legacy was not there in what he said, but in as lived. Matthew, by his part, continued filming. He traveled to others' countries documenting stories similar. Children with horses, bonds that healed, silences that cured more than words, but always returned to Raíces Libres, where all there was started. On one of his visits, he proposed to a series of shorts titled Heirs of Silence, where ancient center participants they counted as that experience that there was transformed. The series, it was a success, modest, but authentic. It inspired new centers to new initiatives, already a collaborative network that spread further beyond what Julian once said, time imagined. Every time Matteo projected a new chapter, it ended with the same phrase, "This story doesn't end, it just changes voice." And with that conviction, kept alive the echo of that boy who, one day, decided to approach a horse without further ado, weapons that his silence. One spring afternoon, Noah organized a special day just for girls and boys new. It was an activity different, no instructions, no schedules, just a free space to explore, observe, and feel. At the end, he asked each of them to draw what they had sense, not what they had done, but what they had sense. Among all the papers, one called his attention, a drawing simple, of a horse with wings and a wheelchair next to it, under a tree. Below, a phrase written in pencil, "This place it smells to a calm soul." Noah kept it in his notebook, and that night, before going to sleep, he stuck it next to a photo of Julian. It was given, I realized I no longer missed him with pain. I remembered him with gratitude, and I understood that this was also part of growing up, moving on, walking with those who us taught to walk, although are no longer there. The center began to receive visits from professionals, researchers and journalists who wanted to understand his model. But Noah, always he repeated the same thing. There is no model, there is only listening, presence and respect. He showed them the spaces, shared stories, but made it clear that nothing would work if it was not done from the soul. Some understood it, others didn't. And that was okay too. It wasn't a place for everyone. It was a refuge for those they knew look further beyond the visible. One day, a journalist insisted in ask that made Races Libres so special. Noah thought for a moment and replied, "Here nobody comes to tame nothing. Here we learn not to have fear of the untamable that we carry inside." And at that moment knew he was ready to write his own history, not as successor, but as new planter beginnings. With the time, Free Roots expanded his work to other regions, not with branches, neither franchises, but with support to those who they wished replicate the essence of the project. Noah and others volunteers traveled to different communities, carrying I Get, Julian's philosophy, start by listen. In each place, they adapted he worked to culture, to the resources, to local stories. They were not looking copy he original center, but inspire roots new. In one of those travels, Noah met a young man who also used wheelchair and dreamed of creating a space for young people. They stayed talking until the dusk, sharing fears, longings and silences. And when he asked her, as there was started everything, Noah didn't talk to him about techniques, nor strategies. He told her about a boy who approached a horse without asking for anything, and how that gesture change lives whole. Years later, already with grey hair on the temples and more stories that time to tell them, Noah wrote his first book. He titled it Roads Without Reins. And he wasn't just talking about Julian or thunder, but about each child, each horse, each silence that there was left a mark. In the prologue wrote, "This story born from pain grew with patience and blossomed with love. It is not mine. It belongs to those who still they search with their souls wounded for a place where they are not asked, run." The book was read in schools, hospitals and universities, but above all everything was read in low voice, by mothers in the early morning, by teenagers in crisis, for grandparents who never dared to cry. Because that history, born in a corral in Nevada, it was no longer just a boy and a horse. It was now part of everyone, those who needed believe again. One morning one little girl new arrived at the center. He had afraid of horses and spoke very little. Noah approached gently, as if there was learned years back. He showed him a corner of silence. He spoke to her about the earth, the wind, and respect. And when the girl asked, horses could also feeling sad, Noah responded with a smile. Horses feel everything, like us. That's why us understand better than anyone. That was the first step of a history that barely was beginning, because each arrival new era, one seed, and each gesture, by however small it was, it could become in root. Noah knew it, and for that, cared for each moment as if it were the first. At the end of that day, Noah walked to the oak tree where Thunder and Julian were resting. He was wearing with him a sheet of paper with a drawing. A horse with wings and a girl holding hands with a hairy woman picked it up. He left it under the tree without saying anything. The sun was going down slowly, turning orange the fields, and in that deep silence, full of memory and future, Noah understood that the great stories don't end. They just change body, voice, shape. As long as there is someone willing to listen with an open soul to Julian and Thunder's story, and everyone's story, those who came afterward, she would still be alive, breathing softly, trotting leisurely by the corners of the world. Years. Further afternoon, in the Exposure International about therapy assisted by animals, a young student presented his investigation about free roots. He showed old videos, interviews, fragments of Mateo's documentary and readings from Noah's book. At the end of his presentation, someone from the audience asked him, I believed that this history would continue current in her future. She did not hesitate. While there is a child who needs to be looked at with tenderness, and a being, human or animal, willing to offer you his presence without conditions, this history will remain alive, not because she is perfect, but because it is true. And when saying that, he felt he was speaking not only as researcher, but as part of an invisible chain that one day began with a boy in wheelchair and an impossible-to-tame horse. And so, in some corner of the world, when the sun sets and a child dares to approaching a horse with fear, but also with curiosity, the story starts over. They may not be called Julian or Thunder, there may not be cameras, neither books, neither spectators, but the essence will be there. The respect, patience, connection. Because some stories do not belong to anyone, they belong to the world. They belong to those who, even without knowing it, carry in his chest his desire to heal and the courage to offer love without asking for anything in return. And in that small moment of encounter, in that whisper between species, the memory of Julian and Thunder breathes a time more, silent and eternal. If this story touched something in you, subscribe now. Every click of yours gives us strength to continue giving voice to those who heal in silence.